Well, Grant, thank you so much for helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Okay, my name is Grant Allen Anderson. I'm the president and CEO and one of the co-founders of Paragon Space Development Corporation. We're a company that has been doing life support in extreme environments and biological life support since 1993. So we've been in it for 27 years.
And you all had a number of projects that I've been aware of over the years. Like one was developing a greenhouse for the moon. Another one was the whole Inspiration Mars project. I was wondering if I got that right, and if you might be able to talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of stories. One about the greenhouse on the moon, the Mars, it was called the Oasis, the Moon Oasis, and actually that stemmed from a project we did for JPL back in the 1990s, which was to put a greenhouse on Mars where you could take biologically engineered plants, the Arabidopsis plants, which is sort of the white mouse of biological plant biology world, and make them grow in Martian regolith. And so we would condition the regolith, leach out the poisons or otherwise neutralize poisons that we know are there, and then try to grow plants. That went on then, and actually when Elon Musk sold PayPal and he was looking for something to do with his money, he had the aspiration of doing a space spectacular, and he came to us and said, hey, can you build a greenhouse for Mars? So we actually had down in our lab back in the early 2002 or so, that prototype. And then he went out to figure out how to launch it and started SpaceX because he figured out that he couldn't launch anything for a good price and felt he could do that. So we actually helped him start SpaceX and took him all the way through the PDR on the Dragon 1 vehicle, and also wrote and did the schematics for what is now the life support system for Dragon 2.
Okay, so y'all worked on the environmental control and life support systems for the Dragon?
In the initial part, Elon likes to do things in a vertically oriented fashion. So pretty much about 2013 though, so after about 10 years, he said, hey, I'm going to go off and do this by myself. And so that's what he did. We've had to remind him a few times about his non-disclosure agreements with us, but other than that, we've been hoping that he had a successful mission, which he just concluded last month. So things are going around. It's interesting, having been in the business as long as I have, watching that sort of from the beginning to now, 17 years of SpaceX. But I should say the Boeing CST-100 architecture is pretty much our design too, and we provide the humidity control system for the CST-100. So when that one launches, we'll be excited. And then of course now we're working on moon projects.
And I've also talked to you're part of the Dynetics team, that one of the three companies to win the human landing system, I guess, to do the environmental and life support systems for that as well, right?
That's right, yeah. So what's known as the HLS, the Human Lander System, we are on the Dynetics team and doing the environmental control and life support system. Of course, that's a complex system because you have to not only give them life support in the module when they're going to and coming from the moon, but also on the moon, you're interfacing with all of the spacesuits they're in, and then the system becomes an airlock and you have to be able to vacate it and get them out onto the surface. And so there's a lot of complexity associated with the environmental control system.
Now, I know that was kind of like the architecture with the Apollo limb was, they vacated all the air and just opened it up to space and walked out, as opposed to having airlock. So you're saying with the Dynetics design, they're also planning to stick with sort of that same plan?
Since we're in a competition, I'm really not at liberty to say how we're doing it. So you're going to have to wait until you see the design emerging later this year and in early 2021.
That I'm definitely looking forward to it. Kind of watching every milestone, creating like event parties to celebrate each of the steps that y'all take. So there's a lot of people who are cheering y'all's efforts on. And I'm just wondering, I know this is like your day-to-day job, and I've talked to other people who are working on the Artemis program. Like I have a high school friend who's like a program engineer over at Lockheed doing the testing for the Orion capsule. And one of the things he relays to me is that, oftentimes whenever you get caught up in just the the details of work, it's hard to stay connected to the kind of like the excitement and to the impact it could have on society. I was wondering if you also felt had that same challenge with your day to day.
Well, yes. I mean, in fact, I gave a TED talk back in December of last year. It was actually hit the web in January, and it was on being human. And it talks about exploration and why we do it. You know, you often get the false dichotomy of do robots instead of humans, as well as the general purpose of what a robotic mission can do versus what a human mission can do. And a lot of that is the excitement. You know, we're really happy if I think it was 5 million people watched the landing of Dragon 2 coming back from the Demo 2 mission. I think there were like 35 million people watching the last Mars lander, and there may be a commensurate number this time. But remember, there's 600 million people watching the Apollo landings, and that was when only 400 million TVs existed in the world. And I should say also when there was not an internet, so you couldn't just put it off and then go, watch it that night at home. You had to watch it live. So there were people clustered around TV sets all over the world in time zones where it was 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning watching that. It's that human endeavor. It's humans doing amazing things that really capture the imagination of humanity. And so, yes, it is hard to keep conveying that when you're on a deadline and you're working your 65th hour week that week, trying to get a deadline done so that you're keeping up with the design, because we have a very tight schedule to get on the moon by 2024. So I think what we do very often at Paragon, we talk about that. We talk about how cool it is what we're doing, and keep everybody in mind, keep it in the forefront of their mind where we're going with this. You're down in the factory and you're checking out a piece of hardware that's built, and every once in a while you go by and say, it's going to be kind of cool when you see that on TV on the moon, isn't it? And you can see the eyes kind of light up. You've got to have those reminders every once in a while.
And I'm just wondering what we can do in sort of, I'm not sure what to call ourselves, the space cadet community, to kind of help to, send more of that enthusiasm your way and other people who are sort of making it happen.
Well, yeah, I call them space enthusiasts, and there's a lot of them out there. And you got to remember, the whole world aren't space enthusiasts. They have much more immediate concerns in the world. That's one thing amazing about the space program. If you ask anybody in the world what they admire most about the United States, I guarantee you one of the top 3 will be the space program. It really inspires people. And I think from your standpoint of what that community can do is keep reminding people of that, keep going to the human element, talking about how putting a human there and having a human put a footprint on the moon or any celestial body is so important for the future of humanity. It is, Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus, and I know there's a certain political correctness about that now, but there was good parts of the exploration too. And of course, out there's probably not any local indigenous people to harm. So it's really about science and exploration. And again, one thing about humans is, frankly, a mouse could run across the ground on Mars and the Martian lander wouldn't see it because their cameras are too slow and they're not looking for that. Generally, robots only find what you tell them to look for, whereas a human has very much of the, gee, I wonder what that is, let's turn over this rock type of thing to it. So having that human element is really important, and it's really what brings humanity along. So just keep emphasizing that.
Whenever you were talking about how a probe could land on Mars and not see a rat run across, it reminded me of this HP commercial. I don't know if you've seen it, where like the probe lands on Mars and like the Martians are there, and they've printed out like this desolate landscape that they're holding in front of the camera, and then the camera starts to turn, and then they're like, "Oh, you got to print out the other one," and it barely makes it in time. And I don't know if you've seen that.
High-speed printers, yeah, and I have not seen that one. I'll admit I've seen ones very much like it, though. Yes.
Now, I was noticing on your website that you're looking for a lot of thermal engineers and analysts, and I know like for Gwen Shotwell, she got her start as analyzing the thermal effects on like satellites and what have you, and This is a field that I'm not really that knowledgeable about. I was wondering if maybe you could talk about kind of like what does a thermal analyst do and what's like the career path for somebody that becomes there, because we also have like the North Houston Space Society chapter, and we have some young people who are interested in eventual careers in space, and everybody knows about an astronaut, everybody knows about creating rocket propulsion, but there's all these other supporting fields that people don't know about. And I think the thermal engineer and thermal analyst is one of them. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, our world of human spaceflight, and we do environmental control in extreme environments, and so that doesn't include Earth, space. I mean, only it's also places on Earth, but of course, space is the ultimate extreme environment. Um, Once you keep an astronaut breathing, the next thing is you have to keep it the right temperature. We're rather picky, biologically, we're rather picky, and you've got to keep them breathing, and then keep the temperature right, and definitely, especially when you go to the moon, the space is a very harsh environment. Noon and moon, if you have a flat plate that's looking directly at the sun at noon, it'll be 200 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, when that same flat plate is looking out at the stars in a 4 Kelvin background environment, it will be minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Will be its what we call the stability temperature, the average temperature. Really, there's two ways to design a spacecraft. You can cold bias it or hot bias it. If you cold bias it, means that you don't put much insulation on it, and you have enough power to turn on heaters to keep things warm enough. When you hot bias it, what you do is you make it so insulated that's a beautiful thermos, but then now the stuff inside produces too much heat, so you have to figure out how to reject that heat so it doesn't get too warm inside. So you're always fighting thermal one way or the other, either trying to reject heat or trying to collect and create heat, which usually, of course, requires power. And so, yes, we have a lot of thermal analysts. And in fact, one of Paragon's businesses, besides doing the spacecraft because of the extreme environments, is the thermal work done on Earth to make things survive. I mean, it's not just humans on the spacecraft, it's the avionics systems, it's the batteries. Batteries are actually the next pickiest things after humans. So they like to be at a certain temperature, and if you get them too hot, they discharge too quickly, or they can't recharge. So you got to keep them at a good temperature too. So we do a fair amount of battery cooling type stuff on Earth for very high powered objects. If you're having to, say, fire a directed energy weapon or a rail gun or something, you need some really, really high charge and discharge rates, which create a lot of heat, and you have to get rid of it. So ultimately, because we do humans, and humans are 72 plus or minus 2 or 5 degrees, that's really tight, really hard to do. Once you know how to do that, you can do the other stuff almost easily. It's still hard thermal work, but you have to be a thermal expert. So we actually generate more, or we used to generate more fixes to other people's thermal software. The thermal analysis software, we would be testing the envelope of what it could do, and we'd have to tell the company that built the software, oh, by the way, yours doesn't do this right. It doesn't calculate Nusselt numbers correctly, or it doesn't calculate some parameter correctly, because you have these assumptions in your software for, say, a round pipe, and we're not using round pipes. We're using short, flat, square ones or rectangular ones, and that's a different number. And they've had to correct their software in order for us to get accurate results, frankly.
yeah, and I'm just wondering, in terms of, we have a lot of engineers in the Houston area who are from like the oil and gas industry. Um, it doesn't seem like they have to deal with like the same range or types of thermal effects that you would have to deal with in the space environment or the lunar environment. But I was wondering if you knew of some kind of terrestrial industries that were good sort of feeders into and help to develop the skill sets that you need, that you're looking for.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a few. One of them is mining, which we have done. Most mines, especially deep mines, are either too hot or too cold. If they're shallow mines, shallow in way of hundreds of feet, you tend to have water seepage and stuff, and the temperature of the mines tend to be too cool. So you have to figure out how to keep people warm so they can be productive in a mine like that. When you get into the very deep mines, like South African mines that are a mile deep, as you know, for every 1,000 feet you go down, the temperature increases by 5 degrees Fahrenheit. It's called the lapse rate. It's the same thing in the atmosphere. So you get a mile down, that's 5,000 feet, that means you're 25 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the surface. So you have to figure out how to cool them. Another one, of course, is in conflict in the warfighter, supporting them. If you're in a biological hazard suit in Baghdad, when it's 115 degrees in Baghdad, that's a extremely hard cooling problem. How do you keep the person from feeling thermal stresses associated with wearing a suit like that in that type of environment? Very, very cold things, of course, Arctic explorers, Everest climbers and stuff like that all have unique requirements. And then, of course, like with us, we have, of course, the skydiving record. Paragon has skydived somebody at the highest altitude ever. It's 135,000 feet. So we beat Red Bull's record about 5 years ago. Requires a full spacesuit environment. You've got atmosphere that's 1/100th of Earth normal, so your blood would boil. It happened to also be the normal atmospheric pressure on Mars, which is kind of interesting. And then you've got to keep them cool or warm or hot or warm, I should say, in that environment. And the atmosphere can get down. When we were launching Alan Eustace up to 135,000 feet, when he reached the 70, 80,000 foot range, he was at minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Very, very cold. So how do you keep them warm in that environment? So high altitude skydive, of course, that's very much like space. And in fact, it is space for all intents and purposes for how we design things. Giving advice to engineers that are looking to do things so they can get into the space world. It's really know your fundamentals, because we really operate at the edge of the box of where things go wrong and how they happen. So you've got to understand your engineering very well. Ultimately, we can never ever guarantee 100% that something's going to work. What we have to do when we provide an astronaut what we call the safety review package, we say this is safe to fly. We have to convince ourselves it's safe to fly, and we have to provide all the information to the person who's actually putting their lives at risk to say, hey, this is what we've done to make it safe, and they make a determination whether that was enough. The Inspiration Mars program you mentioned before was sort of like an Apollo 8 around Mars, and it was going to be a 380-day mission or something like that. And somebody asked me, ethically, how can you send somebody on a trip like that? And it is, you work with a person, you let them know what engineering you've done, what you've thought of, all the things that can go wrong and how to mitigate them. But ultimately, we've done our moral job by doing the best job we can, given the constraints we have, and also by making sure that the person who is actually putting their life at risk knows the risks, knows where the good and the bad and the ugly, so to speak. Hopefully there's no ugly of the design are, and they are willing to say, yea, verily, I trust this enough to go put my life on it. And that's what we have to do.
That makes a lot of sense. Just coming back to a few things that you said earlier about the false dichotomy between sending robots versus sending humans. This is something that I've talked about and thought through. And on one hand, it seems like you could get a lot more exploration and make it cheaper by sending lots and lots of robots, because you don't have to worry about keeping the humans alive. You don't have to deal with the thermal issues in the same way, a lot larger tolerances.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I think we've all had that experience where we go and see like a canyon or a mountain or a tall building, and we take that picture. I mean, like that picture of Earth, this is not the first picture that was taken of Earth from a distance, but
Right.
it's the first one that had people reacting to it, and sort of that reaction became infectious.
Mm-hmm.
And like whenever you go on a trip and you see a really tall picture, and you're just like, they're in awe, and you take a picture of it and you show it to somebody, they don't have that same reaction to the picture that the person standing there was. So I guess, do you think that's like fundamentally the main difference, or are there like some other differences that we should also consider?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, the main thing is that the human's the best computer around, because we're an adaptable computer. The joke about what I said about the mouse running across the camera is one thing, but it is the curiosity aspect, and we are pattern recognizers. As human beings, we are set up to see unusual patterns or notice patterns and log them deep in our brain. It's a millions of years old evolved process for us. and then be able to see subtleties that, you know, if you look at it back from the survival of the fittest standpoint, kept us alive when we were evolving. And that is, at this point in time, impossible to program into a computer. I've always tried to hesitate the word impossible, and people will say, well, we've got quantum computing coming up and everything else. But ultimately, there's only so many if-then statements you can put into a computer bank. And there's just an infinite amount of if statements that a human can process at once. And so getting them involved in the exploration is really, really important. And I want to emphasize, I am in no way at all denigrating the robotic missions. They are extremely valuable. They're also extremely good and extremely impressive, the amount of work that goes behind them. But it does have a little bit of trouble of bringing on the hearts of humans, bringing along the hearts of humans. You know, your audience is the enthusiastic group. And I think they're going to be excited whether it's a picture from a robot or a picture from a human. But the average human being, of the 7 billion of us that are on this planet, knowing a human's behind the camera and they're taking a picture of something that's interesting to them is a key to true exploration that you just miss with robots, unfortunately.
Well, and I also wonder if we're missing it with the humans too, just because of the way we approach it and sort of the role that the human has in it. Because what I've seen from our exploration is that we're essentially treating our astronauts as technicians as opposed to principal investigators. And I guess what I mean by that is pretty much every hour of their day is planned. You know, they're meant to test specific questions. You know, they're not the ones that are actually in the environment asking questions, finding answers to those questions as they think of them, but seem to be like the hands, eyes, and ears for people that are still back here on Earth. And I was wondering if that was an incorrect sort of assessment, or if some of that resonates with you, and if you think it could be
No,
better.
yeah, especially in the early years with Apollo, you know, they started doing geological field surveys and stuff. In fact, up here in northern Arizona, the Meteor Crater and stuff. And it was interesting. There were two blocks of astronauts. One astronauts were like, "Hey, we're test pilots. We're just flying a spacecraft that's never been flown before, and I'm not interested in the science." There was another whole cadre of astronauts who were like, "Hey, wow, this is really cool stuff," and really enjoyed learning the new field of geology that they'd never been introduced before, and really you saw the quality of the science part of the Apollo program once they had landed a few times and had more confidence in their hardware to get the job done of getting them there safely and back, that they did try to do as much science as they could. And of course, with Mitchell on the last one, where Schmidt on the last one, where they sent him as a scientist. One of the astronauts had joked that that Harrison Schmidt was proof that God never meant man to fly, because he had no pilot sense apparently at all. I don't know how true that is, but the idea of sending the scientists, and so I think we are evolving more to sending scientists that we've taught how to fly, as opposed to sending flyers that we have taught how to science. And so that will be a shift over time. Of course, just like with the space station, as you get longer and longer resident times, and keep the maintenance part of the spacecraft down. So in other words, one of the issues with the space station is that it takes so many hours just to keep it running that you don't have a lot of time for science. That will evolve as we put the boots on the moon and then do a sustainable presence. And of course, that's NASA has been emphasizing that. Jim has been emphasizing that really well. The sustainable presence is really important, because we think that's when the science will really be done. We'll get a little bit away from did the hardware work, did the spacecraft work, to, hey, what did we find out? And that's where we ultimately want to go with any exploration.
Yeah, I know we're coming right up on the hour. I didn't know if you had a little bit more time, or if we needed to like wrap things up.
No, I have a little bit. We're doing this, of course, on a weekend, so I do have time. I do have to get to something else. Unfortunately, being the president and CEO of a company in an exciting era like this, my weekends are kind of spoken for, but I have some extra time. We can go further.
So how do you envision like this whole thing unfolding in terms of if you were to look out like 500 years, how far have we gotten? Are we still on Earth making sort of like these day weekend trips to places, or have we generally expanded the bubble of humanity and civilization beyond Earth? I mean, what's your thought?
Wow. Well, if you think about it, 500 years from now, we were 100 years into exploring, for the Western European world to be exploring the North and South American continents. And we've come a long way since then. So putting on a crystal ball and looking out 500 years, I can guarantee only one thing, and that is I'm going to be totally wrong. But, you know, I believe we will be, as Elon Musk likes to say, a multi-planet species by that point. There will be permanent bases, not only on the moon, not only on Mars, probably on a few other places, Ceres, and artificial worlds, artificial, you know, habitats that are out of Earth's Earth's low orbits and in more eccentric orbits, maybe the Lagrange points or something like that. I think that will be permanently staffed and maybe even independent by that point. Who knows? They may actually belong to the United Nations if the United Nations still exists 500 years from now. They may have declared independence and become their own entities at that point. You never know.
Now, to me, the 2020s feel like to space what the 1990s were to the internet. Like, I mean, it feels like there's so much development and activity and sort of interest, and that we finally got up to the level of economic and technological development to actually go out there and start really creating some chain reactions that develop into this whole space economy and space ecosystem. And as somebody who's in that in the system, do you think that is an accurate way to think about it, or do you think that maybe just a little bit over enthusiastic? Or, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, no, I mean, the internet is a good example. Ultimately, every new technology, whether it's electricity or labor-saving devices that are invented, they've all started out slow and then gone through a major acceleration. There's an actual name for that curve, and I can't remember right now. And I believe that it's in that acceleration phase now. You could joke that Paragon was started by maybe 15 years too early, but it's been excited to be at everything. You mentioned the Orion program, and we were on Lockheed's team when they won that program. In fact, I was the 5th longest person on the proposal for Lockheed when they won Orion. Then there were now like 200 people working it then, but I was the 5th longest. In other words, when they got awarded, there were only 4 other Lockheed people that had been on the proposal longer than I had, and of course I wasn't a Lockheed person. I was a contractor with Paragon at that time. Paragon was a contractor to Lockheed, I should say. And so yeah, that we are in this other acceleration phase. Mind you, there have always been bumps in the road. There has always been. There's never an inevitability to anything. There is happenstance and bad luck to some degree on almost every development. But the one thing cool about the sort of the market economy and how it works is ultimately, if it's needed and if it's wanted, it will happen. And so I think with the new commercial bent to it all, there's a little less worry that politics will suddenly change, and sort of like the Chinese burning their fleet of ships long ago and essentially abandoning exploration. I don't think that's going to happen, because it's no longer just a government enterprise where the governments can change priorities and change their priorities. Once you get in the market economy and being driven by a market economy, there's really no way of stopping it or putting the genie back in the box. And thank God, because we really want it to go forward. It's going to be really interesting in the next 10 years. I mean, I'm now in my upper 50s. When I started Paragon, I was 33 years old. I've seen a lot, and I expect to see more. And I'm not planning on going anywhere soon, but you never know. life is precious and also mercurial sometimes. But I think that we will see an acceleration to visiting. As most things, it will probably be the rich or those that are well-to-do or otherwise well-placed will experience it first. But as the price point comes down, more and more people will be able to experience it until such time as in the case of Jeff Bezos, thinking of millions of people working in space. It's literally, well, I applied for a job and that means I have to get on a rocket next week and fly up to X place for a 2-year stint at this space station. And we're going to get to that, and it may be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, you're going to have all these hyphenated jobs which have astronaut in them. It's like astronaut firefighter, astronaut ambulance driver, astronaut, house cleaner, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they'll short that too. So it'll be an astrofighter or an astro driver or something like that. It's just too long. One of the things you always see is acronyms in the world of space, and it just takes too long to say things. So it's a good science fiction writer, and I know Heinlein was extremely good at that. He would come up with his own languages based upon the vernacular and how he saw it changing over time. And he invented a lot of new words just on his own. And Larry Niven is also that way too.
And we talked. I mean, it seems like in terms of developing the market economy, NASA's really had some programs they put in place to help to grow it, like the commercial resupply to the space station, the commercial crew program, and then the commercial lunar and payload services program, where you have like these 15 companies bidding on work orders every 2 years. In fact, I was talking to Jennifer Lopez over at Astrobotic, who's another member of the Dynetics team for the cargo piece. Yeah. And it just seems like it's really neat seeing all these independent people putting different ideas into place and sort of playing them against each other and encouraging each other and just come up with better ways to do things. But on the other hand, coming to the human lander system, it doesn't seem that everybody in the Congress, especially in the House Science Committee, that kind of controls NASA's mandate, is on board with that. And largely they, credit it to testimony that they've had from the more traditional, the past eras of spaceflight. And I was just wondering what you felt could be done to sort of make them more aware of how effective these sort of competitive commercial programs were, as opposed to the old idea of NASA needing to build, own, and operate the entire system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in that case, just pulling, and I know the charts exist, to pull together what we've accomplished with the dollars that the commercial crew programs have done versus what we have done, say, with Apollo. And Apollo cost $120 billion in then year dollars. So it's a half a trillion dollars. It was it's the way to really, and in fact, that's one thing that your group can do, is call your Congress people and talk to them about what's important about spacecraft, space flight to human space flight. But in general, Congress reflects the constituency in which they rely on for votes. And the main thing is to make sure that you as a constituency can actually explain to them why it's important to you. And if they hear enough about that, they change their views to accommodate it. What they do here sometimes is, well, the one I've heard a lot is, oh, well, 2024 is just way too aggressive. There's no way we can do it. That I don't prescribe to that, frankly. From a technical standpoint, I'm deep in it. I know we can do it. I see most of the barriers for 2024 being contractual in nature, and getting decisions made quickly enough by the management and the bureaucracy associated with management, so that the engineers can go off and do their job the way they need to do, and not have to second guess or third guess or say, hey, give me one more trade study on this. You eventually have to decide and go forward. The time for innovation as far as doing something innovative to get it as over for the 2024 missions. You've got to be putting the pencil to paper, designing the hardware, building it, testing it, and getting ready to go at this point. And so I do see most of the barriers, and the barriers that I'd love Congress to go after are the time barriers associated with the getting the management and bureaucracy to move as fast as the technical people can. And that's difficult to do sometimes.
And I just wondering if having three companies competing for that human landing system and essentially being all private companies allows for y'all to kind of move ahead of that, and y'all can kind of wait for the management to catch up, or from the NASA side, or is that also maybe a little too optimistic?
Oh no, I mean, and again, I have to be careful with saying what I'm seeing, but I mean, there are 3 teams working on HLS. It's not really 3 companies. There's multiple companies working on these things, but 3 teams of companies that are doing it. And one of the things I'm seeing very much so is there is a great collaboration, at least between our team and NASA and stuff, and being able to poke on the parts that, okay, you asked for us to keep this constituency of trace contaminants down the vehicle, but it costs so much to do that, and it's not harmful, but we can do this to keep it below this level. Can we do that? And there's that type of dialogue going on, and that's refinement. That's getting down to the nitty-gritty details, but of course, engineering is about nitty-gritty details. And those things are happening, and so that can happen at a technical level all the time. Getting the contract changes, having the contract keep up with the technical aspects and saying, oh, okay, the contract now has to be modified this way so we can go do this and apply this solution to the problem as opposed to the one we were thinking of 6 months ago. That's what I mean by sort of the contractual bureaucracy associated with trying to keep up with a fast-paced program is really tough. And really, this is what the commercial world brings to something like this. The public-private partnerships. The government is very, it's very tough to make a decision, make a change, and go quickly through it. Commercial world, you have to do that in order to survive. So by combining that and having the commercial world push for that helps, and it keeps everybody moving faster. So again, I'd encourage any of your listeners to maybe pull up what are the cost of different space programs and look at commercial crew. And I know that people say, well, it's not really commercial because you're getting government money. Well, that's, when the government buys a pencil, you can say that pencils are no longer a commercial endeavor because the government is buying the pencils, but it's just not true. When the government is just buying the service and not actually building and owning the operation of that service, it is a totally different dynamic and environment, and the commercial side can always run faster. I don't think that's controversial to say.
And you touched on a lot of things over the course of the conversation in terms of the government reflects the people. The people have a lot of things on their mind beyond space. News has changed a lot since the first time we went to the moon. Instead of having 3 broadcast stations with no recording and a couple of newspapers per town, now everybody gets highly customized feeds. You don't have to pay attention in real time. There's a lot of people who, originally when I started this project, it was meant as like an anti-social distancing thing. I work from home, and I thought I would go and do the interviews of like people at the coffee shop and what have you, just random people, to ask them, hey, do you know we're going back to the moon? What do you think about it? That type of thing. And the vast majority of the people I've talked to that had no clue that we were planning to go back to the moon. In fact, a lot of them thought, didn't they end all that? And then some other people thought, well, haven't we always been going to the moon? So it's kind of had like the whole range of perspectives out there. And I just wonder what you think might be required to sort of make people more aware.
Well, it's good public advocacy and public and getting on those Twitter feeds and on those social media accounts and Instagram, keeping up with the young generation of what they are getting their news from now is important. Trying to speak to them. I mean, we have the same thing. We're recruiting people. It's not good enough for us now to, we don't put an ad in Aviation Week saying we're looking for a thermal engineer. It goes out and goes on social feeds and stuff like that to reach the people the way that they do consume information and find out new things. So you have to do that. There is a certain amount of again, it's because enthusiasts like you've called yourself a space, you have a certain mindset, and you got to remember that not everybody's that way. Remember when the space shuttle's last mission happened in 2011, when they said, oh, this is the last shuttle to fly, the #1 reaction from people in Congress is, what, it's not going to fly anymore? Even though they had voted to cancel the program 5 years before, and it was just running out since then. You know, they had gone through multiple elections since then, and the new representatives didn't really know what was going on, and it's out of sight, out of mind a little bit. You don't want to build up a false sense of excitement, though. I mean, you get a little bit of the Chicken Little / crying wolf type thing, hopefully not for bad reasons, but for good, of that if you saturate the airwaves with stuff, that the value of each touch becomes a little bit less. I am not a marketing expert. Paragon, obviously we try to keep ourselves out in the industry so people will call us when they need something. But I certainly don't aspire to be a personality in the space world. And so unfortunately, a lot of people like that personality stuff. So let's leverage that. You got people that do have visibility on the mediums that the young are engineers and stuff, or the potential engineers in middle school and high school, and then the young engineers, they start out, they are listening to certain sources. You got to find who they're listening to and make sure you get the word to those sources, so they can get the word out.
And that's a very good point. And sometimes I think, with like the Constellation plan and even further back with like Bush's seniors push to get us to Mars and to the moon and what have you. I think a lot of people are like, well, NASA's really great at coming up with PowerPoints and plans, but I'm not going to get myself worked up on it. So I tend to think that whenever we see like Artemis 2 with kind of like reenacting that Apollo 8 type of thing, that'd be a big turning point, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so too. It's this generation needs another Apollo 8. The last Apollo 8 was Christmas of 1968. I mean, I'll tell you, I was only 5 years old at the time. So, and I can't say I remember it at that point. I was living in the United States at that time, because my father was a diplomat, so I grew up all over the world, but I happened to be living in the States at that time. I vaguely remember it. I definitely remember the moon landing. But I think this generation needs that. That's one thing Elon Musk has done, and to a lesser extent Jeff Bezos. You notice the rocket cams. Rocket cams were kind of starting to be coming on with the shuttle and some Air Force projects. They sometimes had the ability to see a rocket cam later, never live. It was Elon and then the push to have it live so people could actually be there and experience it. And now it's standard. In fact, if a rocket launches without a live feed, it's really rare nowadays, including live feed on the spacecraft, on the rocket itself. That has been part of that reaction to bringing people along. And of course, the iconic picture of the two different boosters landing from the Falcon 9 Heavy, I think will be an iconic picture. It will be a picture that will show up in textbooks perhaps another 10 or 20 years from now. But we need really another Apollo 8 first, just to make people understand where we're going with this and how, and get to know the hardware, so that when we do land people on the moon, that they've been brought along, at least so far. So it's not just that they turn on their feed one day and get this, hey, this is cool, we're landing on the moon. Hopefully that's not how they find out about it. There will be a buildup to it, just by nature of doing incrementally harder things.
So if it was safe and affordable, would you have an interest in going into space yourself?
Yeah, sure. Of course, the life support system I wouldn't have any problem with if my company built it. I know that I'd have full confidence in that. And in fact, that's Paragon's goal, is that anybody who goes to space, your kids go to space, they look up, they see a plaque that says your life support by Paragon, and they know they're in the best hands they can be in. That is really our goal. But yeah, I would. The overview effect, I've heard enough astronauts talk about it, of just seeing the world from that perspective is life-changing to some degree. Of course, I'm also an engineering nerd, so I have a very good idea of the engineering and understanding of what's going on with the engineering, and the different orbital dynamics. I mean, my master's degree is in aeronautics and astronautics. I've done small perturbation orbital theory and stuff like that. So I know I have a better understanding than the average person on what's going on in space. But so that would be fascinating to me too. But I'll admit, I would be just like anybody, you know, go up north in Arizona and see the Grand Canyon for the first time, and there's a rare person that looks and says, looks like a ditch. No, it doesn't. It's a beautiful, gorgeous, awe-inspiring sight, and seeing the Earth from space is probably the ultimate.
Well, Grant, I really appreciate the time. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Oh, well, no, this was a pretty thorough overview of everything. I think the main thing I want to emphasize is that this is not easy. We joke a little bit about the generation of engineers that I call it the Iron Man effect. You may remember in the original Iron Man movie, you know, Robert Downey Jr. gets all mad. Or he wants to make the Mark II vehicle, and he talks to his computer, I can't remember, Jeeves, whatever he calls it, and that's where he makes it red and gold, and they talk about it, and then he says, well, how long will it take this to build? And the computer says 5 hours and 38 minutes, sir. And he goes off to a party in LA while the thing's being built, and then he gets mad at something, he hears at the party, and comes back, and it's all built perfectly and going and ready for him by that. And I call that the Iron Man syndrome problem, is that it's not just about designing, and we as engineers, we have to design down literally to the bolt size and the type of bolt we use, you know, the thickness of the wires and stuff like that. It takes time from then taking that reality and putting it into real hardware and building it. In the life support world, we have an extra problem, is that you cannot accelerate it. So like you can build an aircraft and say, well, it needs to survive 30,000 cycles, and you can cycle it once every 20 minutes and get up to 30,000 cycles in, you know, months of testing. With life support, biology never speeds up because you want it to. There's a little bit of function by temperature, but reality, biology, and the chemistry associated with life support, you cannot hurry it up. So you have to build the system and run it through a full mission length before you fly it, to know if you've hit all the things. And then of course there's a problem if you're testing it in 1 gravity on the ground, and then you have 0 gravity. If you talk to NASA, people will tell you 80% of all the failures in the life support system on space station have been due to 0 gravity effects. You know, things that got powders that floated around that otherwise wouldn't have in the ground unit. So you have to get it up into 0 gravity and microgravity and test it. And that all takes time. So we've got to get the hardware built. You know, we're in the middle of designing it literally down to the screw right now, but we need to build it and get it into testing, and life support will become the long pole in the tent for any spacecraft right now going to the moon or Mars, and frankly is right now the long pole in the tent. And so you've got to make sure that you start it up and you get it going quickly, and that sometimes is hard for people that have been dealing with rockets. Rockets have fire and smoke, and they're very interesting that way. I'll admit, testing life support hardware is a little bit like watching grass grow. It's you're waiting for biological fouling, you're waiting for things like that. So I would just say, let's get going. Let's get it the hardware built, start testing it now, so we're ready to go when the rocket's ready to go.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, you look at these test firings of like the rocket engines. I mean, they're a few seconds, but I mean, to your point, your life support system is going, pretty much anything you do would probably last a few seconds. It's the weeks and the months that you're really concerned about. And
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and you know, there's 2 different ways. There's continuous processing, and then there's batch processing. And in general, things like fecal matter and urine, which of course we have to work with, are batch processes. You build up a certain amount, then you have to clean it or flush it or do something else. There's some continuous processes like pulling out trace contaminants as they build up that you have to do, and you have to balance all those and make sure that you've got enough sources and sinks and tanks and stuff so that you can do these batch prices. You know, you can't overflow a septic tank in space. Let's put it that way. That's a really, really bad day and a danger to the mission. So you gotta know exactly how the system works. And then, of course, when you get it in and with real humans operating it and real things happening and real operations, that's when all the nasty surprises come out. So you really want to get into that operational testing as fast as possible.
Well, Grant, I really appreciate your time, and I'm just so grateful to get to talk to you, and actually I get to talk to somebody that's making it happen, and I look forward to celebrating your milestones as they happen.
Okay, well, great. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, have a good day.
Thanks, Nathan. Bye.